So, have you ever really stopped to think about what separates humans from animals? I mean, we usually just assume it's a clear biological line. But what if that line isn't just about biology? What if it's actually one of the most powerful social tools ever created? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack a pretty fascinating theory. It's called the race, culture, gender, species system. And it basically argues that the way we define human is completely tied up with the power structures that shape our world. So, yeah, let's dive right in.
Right. So is the line between human and animal biological or is it political? It's a huge question. We're all taught to think it's just a simple biological fact, right? But what if that boundary isn't neutral at all? This theory we're looking at suggests that this exact dividing line, well, it might actually be one of the most powerful political tools ever invented. And it doesn't just shape how we see other species, it shapes how we see each other.
Okay, so the core idea is this. That sharp line we draw between us, the humans, and them, the animals, it's not really just about biology. It's what you'd call a social construct. It's a story we've created, a story we tell ourselves. And it turns out it's a really useful story for creating and propping up all kinds of hierarchies. We're talking race, gender, and culture. So, to really get a handle on how this works, we actually have to go back in time. We're heading to the 19th century, to a moment that was, frankly, a huge scientific crisis for the way society was set up. And the person who sparked it all? You guessed it, the one and only Charles Darwin. You see, when Darwin came along and basically proved that humans were biologically related to apes, oh boy, that sent absolute shockwaves through the culture. I mean, think about it. The whole Eurocentric world order was built on this idea that they were superior because they were separate from nature. So this was a total catastrophe. It completely blurred the line that gave them their sense of authority. They needed a new story, a new justification, and they needed it fast. And the solution they came up with was this new social theory called the ascent to civilization. So instead of a simple black and white human versus animal divide, they created a ladder, a kind of sliding scale of humanity. And this nifty little invention allowed the dominant culture to rebuild the exact same hierarchy that Darwin had just knocked over. And here's exactly how that ladder worked. At the very, very top, you had civilized European men. They defined themselves as fully human. But to make sure they stayed at the top, they had to push other groups down. So women and non-white peoples, they got placed in the middle, positioned as less civilized. And because of that, much closer to the bottom rung, which was the world of animals and nature. What this really means is that marginalized groups basically became a kind of a buffer zone. It's like they were used to absorb all those uncomfortable animal origins that Darwin had just uncovered. This allowed the elite men at the top to distance themselves from their own animal nature and hold on to their claim of being uniquely and superiorly human. So, the result of all this? Human wasn't just a biological category anymore. Nope. It became a political rank, a status that you could earn or have taken away from you. If you were labeled less civilized by the powers that be, it literally meant you were considered less human. Simple as that. Okay, so that was the 19th century. But here's the thing. The theory argues this system didn't just disappear. Not at all. It adapted, it evolved, it morphed into a new form, one that's still operating in our world today, often in ways that are so subtle we don't even see it happening. So in our modern world, you can't just overtly rank different races on a biological ladder anymore, right? That's not socially acceptable. So the system shifted its focus. Now, instead of judging people's bodies, it judges their cultures, specifically how their cultures treat animals. Those same old labels, savage and civilized, are just applied in a new way. It's not about biology anymore. It's about cultural practices. And this slide gives us a really stark example of what that looks like in practice. Okay, on one hand, you've got the animal sacrifice rituals of Santeria, which is an Afro-Cuban religion. We're talking pretty small-scale stuff, but it's often labeled savage and has even been criminalized. But then on the other hand, you have industrial factory farming, an industry that slaughters billions of animals, but it's legally protected and often gets framed as being humane. See the difference? And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of the matter. According to the theory, the law isn't really focused on how much an animal is suffering. No. What it's really targeting is how different, how other with a capital O, the people involved in the practice are perceived to be. So it becomes this tool for policing racial and cultural lines, all under the disguise of animal welfare. But believe it or not, the system gets even more complex. Because it's not just about race and culture, it also gets deeply tangled up with gender. The way we think about and treat animals is often directly tied to our ideas about what it means to be masculine or feminine. And to see exactly how this works, let's take a look at a specific case study, the really intense debate around wolf hunting in Alaska. The theory here argues that the way the wolf gets demonized is connected to this sense of crisis around a very specific identity, what's called frontier masculinity. So the argument goes like this. As the old, traditional roles of the rugged frontiersman started to decline, the wolf was basically recast as the villain. And it was described in these really feminized terms, as a sly, sneaky, deceptive threat. And that threat needed to be violently dominated so that men could feel like they were reclaiming their power and control, basically restoring this patriarchal order over the natural world. And what this shows us is that even within the animal kingdom, not all animals are treated equally under the system. We literally project our own social biases onto them. So you have some animals, like polar bears or dolphins, that are kind of seen as privileged and deserving of protection. But then you have others, like wolves or pit bulls, that get racialized and demonized, and they become targets for control and violence. At the end of the day, the hierarchy we create for animals, it's just a mirror of our own human social hierarchies. Okay, so we've seen how this system connects race, culture, gender, and species. It's a lot to take in. So now let's pull it all together. We're going to look at a framework from a theorist named Carrie Wolf that really maps out this entire four-tiered world for us. All right, let's break this grid down tier by tier. At the very top, you have what are called humanized humans. These are the people whose humanity is never in question. It's just a given. Right below them, you get animalized humans. These are marginalized groups who are treated as lesser than or closer to being animals. Then moving down, we have humanized animals. Think about our pets or those charismatic species like dolphins that we project all our feelings onto. And finally, at the very bottom of the pyramid are the animalized animals. These are beings that are seen as objects for total exploitation. Think livestock or lab rats whose own experiences are pretty much completely ignored. So, what's the crucial point here? What's the main takeaway? It's that the line we draw between human and animal, it is not a simple biological fact. According to this theory, it's a political boundary, one that is constantly being policed. And its main job, its primary function, is to create and justify power hierarchies among humans. And that really leaves us with a final big question to chew on. If all of these categories, humanized humans, analyzed humans, humanized animals, and animalized animals, if they aren't natural, if they're all just socially constructed, then what purpose are they serving in our world today? And maybe more importantly, who benefits from keeping those lines drawn exactly where they are?